The Curve with Michelle Martin and Bernard Lim replay from MoneyFM 89.3.
Well, just 4 years ago in 2015, creativity was ranked the 10th most important skill in the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report. But this year, it shot up to third place, a sign that businesses and organizations around the world are placing increasing importance on creativity, especially as prepare for what many have heralded as the fourth industrial revolution. So what defines this almost elusive but highly sought after skill, creativity, and what kind of value can it really bring to businesses? Well, joining us to tell us more is Professor Xavier Pavie, Academic Director of the Master in Management Program in Singapore and Director of the Imagination Centre at ESSEC. And can you tell us what constitutes creativity, Xavier?
Thank you very much for having me. Actually, this notion of creativity is very important, but it's very simple to understand, which is basically to create things, so generate solutions. So turning so many imaginative ideas in a very concrete solution.
Mm-hmm. So, Xavier, what kind of value add can creativity bring to businesses and also to us as individuals?
Actually, we have to understand the context, and today we have artificial intelligence, you have coding, you have algorithm and so on. So actually, where is the additional value? Where is it? Where does it come from? Basically, what is our role as a human to survive? And creativity is one of the key pillar solutions to survive with this kind of context. So we have no only other way to survive than generate creativity, encourage creativity.
Mm-hmm. Well, is creativity limited to only specific fields? And how do we introduce creativity in fields that involve mundane and repetitive tasks?
Yeah, actually, creativity is everywhere all the time. And in our daily routine, we can find any creativity. You think about business, for instance. Look about companies like Grab, for instance, Uber, Airbnb, and so on. What's that if it's not just how could we use unused car? How could we use unused a bedroom, for instance, which is very simple in terms of the creativity. It's just next door, the creativity. So it's very easy to see that, very easy to see and to understand how could we fix so many daily problem, daily routine, and how could we fix that? So definitely it's not just for one field, one specific one, it's definitely for everyone and everywhere.
Well, Xavier, we all like to think of ourselves as being creative, but do you think this is something that can be taught? I mean, are we born with it, or can we actually develop creativity as we get older and try and untap things within inside our mind?
It's a very good question, because most of the time people say, I'm not a creative person. I'm not an artist. I cannot do that, So the question is, how could we encourage people to be creative, but without a method, because we can believe that it's a bit paradoxal. That's how could we teach, for instance, this notion of creativity. So actually, it's more how could we shape or how could we encourage a specific mindset, a specific attitude and behavior, for instance. So teaching creativity is not a question of process. We cannot say that, okay, now we share together the process and you will become creative after one seminar. It doesn't work like that. Definitely not. Yeah. The question is more, how could we explain to you what the mindset you need to acquire, what kind of behavior you need to train yourself in order to become more creative? But basically, how could you dare? How could you dare to put things together that normally you don't do that? So that's more a question of how could we help people instead of teaching or learning method or process, more about the mindset they need to develop.
Okay. Well, you mentioned the word paradox is now in the answer. So I mean, the other question that I'm sure many of our listeners will be thinking, if creativity can be thought, then it isn't creative anymore. Is that true?
Actually, it's more a question of how is it possible to become creative? That's basically the things. And to become creative is just how could I nourish my brain? How could I nourish my spirit, my mindset to become more creative? If we don't do that, we won't be able to be creative. So for instance, in a classroom or for a seminar, an executive seminar, at some time I cannot say, okay, after one seminar you will become creative, but at least you will welcome creativity, which is very important, because most of the time you will kill creativity. I'm not ready to welcome creativity. So basically, instead of that, I would like to transform and to help people to say, okay, it's creativity. Maybe I'm not really, in favor of this kind of idea and so on, because it's not what some idea that I can provide, that I can think about. But basically, at least I won't kill it.
We're talking creativity with Professor Xavier Pavie, the academic director of the Master in Management program in Singapore and director of imagination Centre ESSEC. Xavier, let's talk about schools and the way that they can encourage creativity. Would this require a drastic revamp of the traditional curriculum? A lot of local schools, sometimes people say it's maybe not encouraging creativity like an international school does.
You're perfectly right. The question is why we have this kind of situation. Most of the time when we have to think about creative people, for instance, we think about children, we think about kids, for instance. And we can believe that, they are creative, but why they are more creative than adults, for instance? It's because they dare to do, and they dare to do until what? Until they go to school, and we will put them with a specific framework, and this framework, we call it discipline or silo. So we will tell them, okay, now it's history, now it's math, now it's physics, and you have to jump into this discipline and then this one, but please don't cross the discipline. Stop to do that. Don't dare to cross the discipline. We have to follow a certain path. And this way kill the creativity. So actually, to revamp in school, as you mentioned, it's perfectly relevant. We need to encourage in school to cross the discipline and to encourage the transdisciplinary.
Okay. Do you think businesses need to refine their understanding of what creativity is? I mean, before they inevitably stifle creativity at the workplace?
You're perfectly right. But actually, what else than creativity to find a competitive advantage? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, today we have a lot of question about artificial intelligence. We have question of algorithm. How could you pilot? How could you manage? Who can drive your customers, your partners, your staff, and so on and so forth. But actually, who will bring an additional value? A competitive advantage. And it won't come, sorry to say that, it won't come for artificial intelligence. It will come just for intelligence, humans one. So actually, that's the human intelligence will bring additional value. So the business has to understand that if they want to continue to bring additional value, they need to bring creativity at the workplace.
Let's talk about some countries that have a good reputation for being innovative and creative. And of course, Japan, South Korea, the Nordic countries. My sister-in-law is from Sweden, and I believe kids don't really get to school until they're about 7 or 8 there. And Sweden has a very good reputation. So what sets them apart from other countries, and why are they so good at being creative, do you think?
It's a good example with Sweden. Norway as well is a good example. As you mentioned, education is key. And when the kids are quite very young, they are very encouraged to have not the disciplines, but more a cross-discipline. And they're really encouraged to think about what they want to do instead of what the teacher wants to do. So actually, it's quite a reverse education, which is that how could the students, the kids, the children, they can do whatever they want instead of I will tell you what you have to want. But it's just one of the part of the answer. The second part could be the size of the population, the size of the country. They have to be open. They have to be open to the rest of the world. So actually, that's exactly the point for Swedes. They have a lot of, I know because I'm in university sector, they have a lot of student exchange, lots of business exchange as well. They have to be open to the rest of the world. That's what we call it, sometimes open innovation. We can call it the open country and open to creativity. So they opened their frontiers to welcome foreign students, to welcome foreign business, as well as they go abroad to nourish their mind. That's exactly the same case with Japanese people. They love to travel, they love to go abroad, they love to discover some other country. So more open you are, more creative you will be.
Okay, so how does Singapore compare with the rest of the world?
Every country has a very specific history, of course. And for Singapore, they didn't have choice at the very beginning of Singapore from 1965 that they have to be focused on the basic things, engineers, roads, education, healthcare system, and so on and so forth. And they, for instance, they really encourage math for that, science, and that's why they are number one. So basically, they essentially encourage what we call it the right part of the brain. The question is, we have two parts in our brain most of the time. So, and the second part is more about emotion. How could we encourage that? And think about what's happened the last few months, actually, in Singapore. The Ministry of Education encourage creativity through art, through theater, for instance, and how students, kids, they have to go and to understand not just math, but also they have a specific sentence there. They have to think about the smell of the flowers. Mm-hmm. That was one of the sentences from the Minister of Education. That's exactly the point. Nourish the emotion of Singaporean students. So actually, they were very, very good in a specific area, the rational part, the functional part, and now they understood that they have to encourage other part of their brain.
You know, my daughter's 9 years old. She's in local school here, and she's quite creative when it comes to music and art. But when it comes to creative writing, she's not so good, you know, as she should be. And it's all about, I mean, that balance between learning words and getting grammar right and then creating something. But she needs to get the structure first before she can really build the creativity. Is that a fair enough assessment?
Actually, we have two schools for that, because most of the people will tell you the opposite. And they will tell them that, okay, let's just the kids write out as they want. You know, we are not supposed to put them in a specific framework and they have to write like this or like that. Who can say there is just one way to write? Who can say there is just one way to sing a song? Who can say that there is just one way to work in a specific place? Mm-hmm. Nobody can say that. So we have to use our own singularity and to encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Professor, we understand that just recently ASEC Business School hosted Imagination Week, or is it Imagination Week, for the 8th year in a row. Can you tell us more about this?
We have decided to create Imagination Week 8 years ago because we have had a few problems. First one is we have students with different background. Foreign students, for instance, English one from Asia as well as from France and so on. And how could we put together in a specific context? And the best one is the imagination. Think together. You have to think and to encourage each other to think about new solution of specific things. So we have decided to create a 1-week seminar dedicated to transdisciplinary. And we welcome lots of speakers. So we receive artists, and we have one artist in residence, for instance, for 1 week. We welcome Everest climber. We welcome scientists. We welcome gastronomy speakers. We welcome all but business. We are a business school. We are very proud to be a business school. But for 1 week, we develop a seminar all but business, just to nourish their brain. And the purpose of that is to help the student to think outside of the classroom. And at least for 1 week, to give the flavor of transdisciplinary. And they have to continue that beyond their school.
It's a very stimulating way to begin the year of the pig, talking about creativity, how to nurture that. I'd like to thank Professor Xavier Pavie, the Academic Director of the Master in Management Program in Singapore and Director of the Imagination Centre at ASEC. All the best for the Year of the Pig.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You too. Thank you for having me.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at moneyfm893.sg or download the SPH radio app available on Google Play or the App Store.